We visited the Highfields Pioneer Village, a 20-minute drive north of Toowoomba City in Queensland. This place is home to some fantastic historic pieces, all in one big collection. So follow along as we explore my top 16 exhibits. Let's kick this off with the World War II bomb shelter. Now, this is one of around 2 million units that was constructed to protect occupants from overhead bombing. And so they're small, so they could barely accommodate one person comfortably. I can't imagine what it would be like for families using these to protect themselves. I do kind of wish I could have climbed down to get a feel for what it was like, but sadly it was completely fenced shut. Now, not necessarily a historic landmark, but a cozy tea house setup where we were blessed with adorable beanies on kettles and we had tea hand-delivered to our table. The staff members also showed us some of the cool 1900s tools, and we awkwardly stood around wondering how on earth people managed to come up with this type of stuff. They had a pretty crazy amount of collectibles here, from pots, pans, jars, mugs, containers, you name it, from who knows precisely how long ago. And we were also cooked a delicious traditional Australian dish, damper. In case you don't know, damper is kind of like bread, but without the yeast. It's quite plain, very floury, so it needs butter or other spreads to make it taste interesting. Somehow we managed to attract the attention of some local ponies while we were having lunch. And our group, being the animal lovers that we are, decided that we were going to go over with the camera and say hi to try and win their trust. And so we began putting our arms out, trying to gain the affection of them, and they didn't really do a whole lot. They kind of just stood there intrigued, but as soon as we started to get a little bit closer, I noticed that they felt a bit intimidated and they started to run away. However, I used the power of reverse psychology to get them to follow me. I just left and pretended like I wasn't interested, and funnily enough, they began following me back into the lunch area straight after that. Quite literally, the big cow. This is a two-piece cow that stands around 9 meters tall, has a concrete core, and it's designed to be completely weatherproofed. Now, if you've ever seen a cow bigger than this, I want you to pause the video right now and go and comment where you saw it and how big it was. Now, this cow was built for a competition initially, but now it stands here at the Pioneer Village to be the ultimate knowledge haven for cow lovers. It's split on the horizontal axis, so anytime it needs to be transported, it would be split into two, put onto a truck and stacked back up again wherever it was needing to be reassembled. And next up we have the toy shop. Sadly, we weren't able to see too much here considering that all of these handcrafted toys were set up protected behind bars, but I suppose it's with a reason. As I can imagine, these toys would be very fragile, and they're set up like this to look a certain way and don't want people messing with their exhibits. So, I mentioned earlier that we had damper for lunch. Now, this right here is the cookhouse that it was originally made in, back in the late 1800s. The gear in here isn't quite suitable per se for a modern lunch, but it was certainly interesting to see all the pots, lids and shovels from back then being over 100 years old. But of course, this is not where our lunch was made, so you might be wondering, well, where did we get our lunch from? Well, I'd ask you to look no further than the actual house around the corner. The house holds all the stock for bread making, and it's representative of a typical olden day household. Had a massive oven built into the wall, however, so it's a little bit different to your typical house. Now, it might not look like much, but this oven extends to around 2 meters deep within the brick compartment of the wall. As you can see from how black the walls around it have become, it gets incredibly hot when it's in use, so we were warned not to go close to it, even though I really wanted to get some cool videos of the fire. If you've ever wanted to feel like you're living in the 1800s, no better way to do so than by standing in a massive shed filled with carriages. The first one off the bat is an ambulance from 1900, but the entire exhibit is in a big museum dedicated to early days of transportation in the horse and carriage eras. It is literally filled to the brim with early settler wagons, general transportation carts, some business carriages and more. It's a cool blast to the past, and if you're interested in vehicles or even the early days of transportation, it would certainly be up on the top of my list to come and check it out. Plus, you can compare the old mechanical devices that were used with all the carriages back then to the mechanical devices that we have in our modern day vehicles. This is Gil's radio room. When I first walked in here, I felt like I was thrown straight into The Little Mermaid, because the first couple areas were packed with what seemed like completely random objects. And I'll be honest, even editing this video right now, I still can't quite figure out any patterns. There's just a lot of old interesting things on display. Ceramics, glass, shells, technology, you name it. But most importantly, for all of the radio lovers out there, here's a giant display of all the radio gear that he collected over the ages. There were so many makes, models, peripherals, and I did not have nearly enough time to stay and admire it all. But if you're a lover of radios, this is definitely the exhibit for you. Next up, we've got the Heritage Chapel. Now this is an actual real church. Yes, it was once used for mass funerals and weddings, but it can still be used to this day for such events. It was relocated and placed onto stilts so that it could be positioned properly in the Pioneer Village. And honestly, all I can say is that it's incredibly picturesque, and it's very impressive that they managed to get this entire church all the way out here. I wasn't able to find out exactly where specifically the church was from, but wherever it was moved from... Can you ever say that you've moved a church? Yeah, neither can I. This here is the Grink Slab Hut, one of the older constructions that we got an opportunity to check out. It's a small hut from the 1800s that was used back in the survival days of the pioneers. Plenty of tools are still stored in this house to this day, but on display. The floor is a bit uneven if you walk in, but it's a cosy little hut, one of the first attractions you see when you walk into the village. Similar to the Slab Hut, this right here is the Grink Cottage. A much cozier and safer setup with a big, beautiful yard and a gorgeous interior. The inside had a strange nostalgic feel to it, but I couldn't quite put my finger on why. Could possibly remind me of maybe some other historical places that I've visited in the past, or maybe even some movies that I'd seen before. I couldn't quite figure out why, but it was quite a nice little place to visit. And whilst it retains its original stature, some of the furniture inside did need to be restored before it could be displayed. Now, getting into the top 5, we're starting off with the old train station. Now, I absolutely love places like this. Right here is an old train station from the early 1900s that has been completely relocated from the central Queensland area. Now, it was originally used to navigate through the western Queensland area, and it began operation in about 1904, and it continued being operated until the early 90s. It stands here now as a testament to one of the earlier running rural Queensland train stations. And next up we've got the bank. Now this is an actual real bank. However, of course, it's not in use anymore, but it was utilised between the early 1900s to the 90s. A lot of the original office supplies, paperwork, coins, checkbooks, all those sort of things are still left here just for demonstration purposes. There's a teller at the bench there. There's also a room off to the side as well, where the bank management will be able to meet with clients. And another fun little fact about this bank, to this day, it is actually still currently sponsored by the National Australia Bank. Now, coming on to number 3, a simple but incredibly satisfying location that I absolutely recommend, the general store. There's something about olden stores that I just love. I love shops, and it makes me happy looking at the fully stocked shelves, but with products from ages ago. Cans, boxes, packets, etc. This general store also happened to double as a post office. I can't speak for a lot of the equipment in here and what the general purpose of it is, however, but I'm sure it certainly would have been fit for use for that post office. Outside there's a lot of gear that I can't quite place my finger on. Of course, it's all rusted away and no longer used to this day, but it still stands there and you can still take a look at it and see, try and figure it out for yourself as to what it would have been used for. Now, coming in at number 2 is the very reason that we came to the Highfields Pioneer Village, the Queensland Ambulance Service Museum. I was incredibly excited to take a look at this place because I love the emergency services, and one of the ones that you probably don't really get to see much of behind the scenes on is the ambulance service. The general gist of this place is that you've got different sections that are dedicated to different purposes. This room right here is set up so that you can see what the radio dispatch room would have looked like, but there are other rooms in here as well, and they've got different rooms dedicated to, for example, a replica hospital room with a bunch of gear in there that you would typically see in your old style hospital room. There was a fence here, so you're not able to walk in and pick things up and touch stuff, but you could at least look in through the door at the type of equipment that they would use. If you like the ambulance service or even emergency services generally, there is no other place like this out there, so I would absolutely recommend coming here so you can get a feel for all of the things that people in the Queensland Ambulance Service used, and to get a bit of an insight as to where it started and where it came from. I made sure to save this more towards the end of our trip to the Pioneer Village, so it would be something that we would remember quite well, but if you wanted to come in here and visit it first, then go ahead. And finally, at number 1, this right here is the Toowoomba Fire Brigade Museum. This is a rural operating Queensland Fire Service station that kind of doubles as a fire station as well as a museum. It is still currently operating to this day by voluntary rural fire service members, but within the entire exhibit they've got an enormous display, a whole load of the original fire service vehicles, such as trucks going back to the 1930s, that's their oldest one, but the majority of the vehicles are around the sort of 50s and 60s. The guys in here were incredibly friendly, and they even gave me the chance to hop into one of these vehicles and muck around with the siren. Yeah, a few of these vehicles still have power to them, and you're more than welcome to hop in, put lights on and turn the sirens on. They've got a lot of other olden gear as well, such as their protective uniform. They even managed to show us the heat sensing camera, and we got a chance to have a bit of a play around with that one as well. I do seriously think that if you wanted to come and spend the entire day here, you could go through and you could just sit down and you could chat with the people that run this place for the entire day if you really wanted to. But unfortunately, this was the final place that we visited, so it left us with the lasting impression of, wow, that's cool. There were even some newer fire trucks in there as well, some that we even recognised from our hometown and went, wow, we've actually seen these exact ones in particular being used. But this was pretty much the final point where my camera battery started to run out, so I'm glad I managed to have a chance to show this off to you guys, and I would absolutely do it all over again. Thanks for watching.